Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the County and Regional Governance Study Committee. This is our second meeting, and I'm Representative Mike McCarthy from St. Albans. And as co-chair with Senator Hardy, we are alternating who is doing the chair duties for each of these meetings. So it's my turn. So I want to thank Senator Hardy for chairing the first one. And now we're on to our second meeting. We've got a pretty stacked agenda today. Documents are up on the committee website. And we now have all of the 6 members. So I wanted to take a minute before we get into testimony and just give Representative Andrews a chance to introduce herself and maybe say something that gave you joy this summer. That's what we shared at our first meeting.
Fair enough. So I'm Julia Andrews. I sit in the House on Ways and Means Committee. I represent Westford and a portion of Milton. And this is a little bit of a stretch because it was a mixed bag, but one thing that gave me joy this summer is helping my 18-year-old daughter get prepared to go off to college.
Great. Anything else that I missed for housekeeping?
I think we're good. Just going to Tim.
Great. So I want to welcome our fabulous legislative counsel, Tim Devlin, back. I think we gave you a couple of pieces of homework that you've reported back on. And so take it away, Tim.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Chair McCarthy, and other committee members. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, legislative counsel. You have access online to an updated memo, which serves as an introductory to county governance in Vermont, both the current status of it and some of the kind of legal issues and considerations that may be in play if the committee opts to recommend modifying either really any elements of county governance. This memo should look pretty familiar. It's just been updated in regards to some resources providing the history of modifications of the counties over time, and also a little bit more fleshing out of the powers of the General Assembly to modify counties and county governance within. I can point you to bottom of the second page, breaking into the top of the third page is, I'll just kind of quote briefly from this. Again, the Vermont Constitution plainly grants the General Assembly the power to create and modify counties and their governance. This can be found in Chapter 2, Section 6 of the State Constitution, Legislative Powers, which states the General Assembly may prepare bills and enact them into law, redress, et cetera, and constitute towns, boroughs, cities, and importantly, counties. It's worth noting that although the Vermont Supreme Court has not yet examined this particular legislative power, it is generally understood that in the absence of constitutional restrictions, the legislature has the absolute power to determine the framework of county government. And, excuse me, looking at elsewhere for those other constitutional strictures, they don't really exist here. There's only a few other references to counties, and those are really getting to county-specific positions like assistant judges or county clerks. So thus, it's in the absence of those constitutional restrictions, the legislature has the absolute power to determine the framework of county governments, save any other legal doctrines, which things that were addressed last meeting, like Dillon's rule and delegation doctrine. Those are not really inhibitive of what this county can recommend the General Assembly does. However, they should be considered in exactly how modification should be approached, especially if powers are expanded at the county level. I should note also those other constitutional restrictions would be separation of powers issues. So whatever the judiciary is doing should be distinct from what the General Assembly is doing, executive offices, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom of the, memo now, this is towards the bottom of page 4. I've added some language and resources regarding the historical record, which demonstrates the malleability of counties by the General Assembly. In practice, the General Assembly has a rich history of creating, dissolving, renaming, and adjusting the boundaries of the counties. We include 2 hyperlinks to resources there. We can see a nice chronology of the many changes that have happened. Granted, those changes have been made in the past 120 years or so, so things have been relatively stable for quite a while now. But in the earlier history of this state and colony, well, colonies surrounding the state, or become the state, there was a lot of things. Notably, however, while the geography of Vermont counties has changed over time, no text of various prior permutations of the Vermont Constitution or other readily available statutory histories indicate that the form of county governance was anything other than largely consistent with what it has been over the history of the state. So although boundaries have changed, what has been county governance really has not.
So that, I just want to put a fine point on that because I think Senator Norris in our first meeting had asked a couple of times for us to really look at, have there been times when there was stronger county government? And so I don't know if that satisfies your question, Senator Norris, before Tim moves on from that point. But there have been a lot of changes to county government, but the powers that it's had doesn't seem like it's changed in our rich history.
Yeah, through my experience, thank you, Chair. Through my experience working somewhat with county government, whatever else, in essence, my interpretation is that there really is no county government in the state of Vermont. There's county positions, but the county government, as we know it in the southern states or the western states, really doesn't exist in Vermont. So that leads me to, why are we here and what's our objective, I guess, is the purpose of this, my questioning, so.
I would say that's a fair characterization of the strength of county government in this state vis-a-vis other states.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Hardy?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think this is really interesting. And I guess to sort of start to put a little bit of an answer on what Senator Norris just asked about why are we here and what are we talking about. I mean, the other thing you point out in the memo is that the legislature has broad authority to make changes to county government. So to the extent that if we see value in some way or another of changing our county government structure or our regional government structure, the legislature has the authority to do that. And there's evidence that they have in the past at least changed the boundaries. I do want to note for those in Chittenden County that Chittenden County was made out of Addison County. And the Addison County was made out of Rutland County. So Rutland County bore Addison County and then Addison County bore Chittenden County. So I think it's kind of interesting. And things have moved around quite a bit up until the late 1800s. I think it was like 1897 was the last major move. But to the first point, we have the authority to make changes if we think that would help government or more importantly, the people of Vermont to have a different level of county government. So that's basically why we're here.
Senator Harrison?
Thank you. I just want to expand on Senator Norris. My understanding is that the county government does actually have the power to impose a tax, impose a property tax, which to me is a pretty big authority. I mean, they aren't using it. It's not being used as much as it could be. But my understanding is that tax is sent to the municipalities as something that the municipalities must include payment for, whether or not they use their property tax to pay for it. But they don't have a choice in not paying that tax.
That is correct. The assistant judges are authorized by statute to set county budgets and levy taxes.
Yes.
It's requirements for that. Those budgets largely have to do with maintaining court facilities and some other county facilities. I think some elements of various sheriff's departments are covered in some county budgets, things like that.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for Tim on the content of the memo? It's a really great update, Tim. Thank you.
One other point, just before moving on quickly, the committee had asked, I believe, me to look into what is a state designated agency. So I can kind of go into that for just a moment, or okay.
Yeah, I think that will definitely inform some of our future conversations.
Okay. Although not strictly defined in statute, a state designated agency is essentially when the state designates a non-state entity for a geographic region to implement a program on the ground by providing services, coordinating, and monitoring outcomes. These are typically grant-based and/or contractual relationships. These designated agencies provide these services themselves, or they can be subcontracted out. They can subcontract out those tasks. Various examples come from the Department of Disabilities and Aging and Independent Living, or DALE, I believe. They have 10 designated agencies contracted by DALE that provide developmental services in Vermont. Let's see, of those, they have 5 specialized service agencies that provide only certain services, so kind of a more tailored version of designated agencies exist as well. Also, the Department of Mental Health designates one designated agency in each geographic region of the state to provide the Department's mental health programs for adults and children. They have also specialized service agencies who may operate in more than one geographic area of the state and provide distinct approaches to service delivery and coordination or provide services that meet distinctive individual needs. And just a quick note, state designated agencies, just to provide some, state designated agencies are different than designated state agencies, which are the latter being, let's see, what the federal government typically requires a state to designate a single state agency to receive and administer the grants for implementing a management program. So there are very similar terms out there. I just wanted to kind of throw that out to disambiguate.
Senator Morrison, please.
Thank you, and thank you, that's helpful. So there's not a definition of designated agencies?
We have reference designated agencies in a few different statutes, but nothing really spells out, this is what it must be.
Okay, because it is different than a contract, I would.
Can be.
Okay, and then are the transit agencies designated agencies?
I don't know, I'd have to look that up.
Okay. I think it'd be helpful to have a list of all of them to the extent that we can.
Okay, look into that.
Yeah, I think the value I think that you might be getting at, Senator Harrison, is not so much just in a list of that's encyclopedic of every single one, but in the kinds of structures that there are, right? So some of them are really basically quasi-governmental agencies where they really are a creation of the state completely. Others are really independent, not-for-profit corporations that the state essentially funds in order to provide a certain service. And those distinctions, I think, are important as we look at potentially, giving new powers to some or trying to consolidate governance of others. Is that?
Yes. I'm particularly interested in the functions that are provided, and then later in how that is structured, how the state either transfers its authority to those agencies or has them do work on their behalf. I mean, if that's clear.
Yeah, I wonder, I think that the way that Representative McCarthy framed it, I think is helpful to our discussion. I just want to make sure we don't get too off into a tangent with it. But if you are able to get some context about the structures of designated agencies and the basic functions without going into too much of a tangent.
Sure, I can probably put together some examples of it, but
Yeah.
my impression is there is no real uniformity across each is just because of some are strictly private entities, some are, they're just various different types of corporations and structures themselves. So certainly, but I can certainly put together some examples of contrasting or just entities to kind of see, okay, these are exemplifies which the state's dealing with.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dave. So our next item is an update from the Technical Advisory Group, and I'd like our chair, Mike McGowan, actually here in the room. If you'd like to join us up at the table.
So Mike was going to help me drive. but I can probably connect to the internet. So.
He's been trying to make sure we don't get interrupted by other technical issues, so I think he's scrambling a little bit here. We'll give our committee assistant just a minute. Do we have your presentation? Yes.
Yeah, you do. I saw there's a printout over there as well. So let me get on the internet here and.
I need the printout. I think this is you've got the one that has the kind of pastel colored.
Yeah, I've,
This one.
Yeah.
as Senator Hardy was saying, got to tell as a finance and city planner person in terms of having to be visual.
Can share. Oh, you have
Does
it.
anyone want paper copies of things? Old school?
I should be able to share screen. Yeah, there.
No worries. Michael, could you help, could you help Michael? Thanks.
And I will just mention, it's not gonna take that long, but I'm doing, school aid, task force is meeting today at 11, so I'm gonna go there and then I'll come back.
Get a twofer.
Yeah.
No, it was a very efficient day here, and then a state meeting later, state committee later today. So, as update for the group, we pulled together the first meeting of the technical assistant curator. Chris was in attendance. We did that virtually at some point recently. I'm forgetting the exact date. I think it was following the first meeting of this committee, and we've scheduled this second meeting for October 31st. So if Halloween wasn't exciting enough, got another reason to be thankful. And so in that meeting, we reviewed the work of this committee, talked about expectations from the technical advisory group for you all. And then our sort of work for that meeting was to, I thought it important to articulate the challenges that the various stakeholders are facing. And so this matrix chart, whatever you want to call it, is an attempt to summarize that in a way that's digestible. I think one thing you'll notice on here, although it was only said by one of the members, I think inherent in all this is the tension between local control and regional or larger governance. I think that is sort of the tension of Vermont in so many ways. So although it's not explicitly called out here, I think that was inherent in a lot of people's thinking. So I don't want to diminish that thought based on this. But I think what there were sort of like 5 main categories in which the comments fell into. Disaster response, which this committee talked about last time as one of the drivers for this conversation. I looped in housing and infrastructure because they are so closely related. And workforce succession issues, funding mechanisms, and then public safety. So if you kind of, and of course, all of these are so interrelated and interdependent, it's challenging, but sort of like where the issue rears its head most acutely is probably what this speaks to. So the workforce succession issues, if you sort of like go by the visual representation, were most present. And so to me, I think what that means are sort of administrative support, technical support, record keeping support, things of that nature. Grant writing you'll see on here, there's some specific categories and articulation of that concept, but in general, workforce succession issues sort of were the most common amongst the various stakeholders. Then, followed by funding, which I think those probably go hand in hand to some degree. And then disaster response and infrastructure, both similarly represented. So I don't know that that's necessarily a priority. These are sort of agnostic as to the value the participants might assign, but just in terms of where the conversation led, those were kind of the main challenges. And then I don't think it's worth me going through, how people represented this, but that was sort of the outcome. And then as we look forward to other meetings of the technical assistance group, we'd be looking to answer specific questions from this group or pass. I think that's probably going to be the way it works best. I think it'll be difficult to pull this group together and expect them to have certain initiatives. Although there were some requests from the co-chairs about specific input from some of the stakeholders for presentations in future meetings, which I realized I did send out a note on that, but need to follow up with those particular representatives. So that was a really short summary, but are there questions? I can also pull up my notes from the meetings. I think others were in attendance. I don't know if it's appropriate to open it up, but I don't know if Chris was there. If there's others.
Other folks from the technical advisory group want to weigh in at this point.
It was Chris Campbell, sorry.
If you want to come and sit up.
Chris Campbell, Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission, representing the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. Yeah, it was a good, it was an introductory meeting. We're kind of introducing ourselves to one another and kind of like a very high level, what are things that you're thinking about? So I suspect that in a subsequent meeting, we would drill down and further define, the issues that we think would be good to kind of get on your all's plate. And I guess one thing I would just suggest, and I'm not trying to put a cart before a horse or anything or be leading, but depending on how you guys want us to function, and you're leading this, I'm just throwing this out, this may be an awful idea, but in addition to fielding questions you guys have and answering them, it might also be helpful for us to send questions up to you that you may just want to ponder. Just kind of living in this space and working in this space, and especially like at the regional planning commission level, the regional development corporation level, kind of crossing so many different programs and agencies and functions. There may just be some things that we just maybe could throw up your way just to kind of say, hey, you may want to invite this person, or you may want to consider this issue, or are we all talking about the same terms when we're making reference to different forms of whether it's governance or coordination or whatever that might be. But anyway, that's my take.
My take, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state. My take on the meeting was that it was a very productive kind of introductory discussion. The thing that was very encouraging to me was that nobody had their mind made up. Nobody came into the first meeting like, no, this is a terrible idea. I don't want to talk about this at all. There were some reservations. There was, we want to keep this in mind. We want to keep that in mind. And then this is where I exposed myself as a huge nerd. For me, a lot of the discussion really tended to rotate around the level of direct democracy in our state. And we right now, as far as states go as a comparison, we have a large amount of structural direct democracy through the municipal involvement, the lack of regional government that gives the town voice a lot of weight. However, I would look at the voting records over the last several decades, and when you see really low attendance in town meeting, yes, we have a high degree of direct access and direct democracy. However, we have a low utilization rate. So something's not necessarily translating there. And when you have a low utilization rate paired with a lack of a regional bite at the apple, then you're seeing a gap, in my opinion, from a structural and a systems perspective. Because a lot of these small towns have no recourse but to go to the state to help them with their issues, right? And that's a big jump, and the state can't always really intervene that productively in a region. So I think that was very interesting to me. I think it was very nice that people were open to talking about it. Some clear reservations, some clear, like, I'm not going to be on, they didn't come out, no one came out and delivered ultimatums, but like, it was clear, like, I'm not going to be on board if this really undercuts what towns are able to do within their own borders. Like, that's not going to be okay with me type signaling. But I think it was productive, and I do agree with Chris that if it's an advisory board,
pushing questions up for the legislative committee to consider, I think is just as valuable, sometimes an advisor. I act as an advisor in many situations. And sometimes the best thing you can do is, these are the questions that as a leader, I feel like you should make sure you feel comfortable with the answer to. I'm not gonna tell you what the answer should be because that's your role as a leader. But I'm just gonna put these questions in front of you as potential concerns. And one last thing. So I worked in, I think about every system that exists. So of course, Vermont with really no county government. I was Deputy Commissioner of Planning and Zoning for Orange County, New York, where you have county government, then you have home rule town government. In Virginia, Mississippi, Louisiana, county government. Maryland, where I was Deputy Director of Planning and Zoning, very strong county government. Louisiana, city parish government, parish being a county there. And one of the challenges I see not only in Vermont, but also in New England is, and I'm not getting to whether this is good or bad, this is not about increasing taxes or anything, is that in Vermont and throughout New England, we do not have an aggregator of public dollars between the municipal and state level, meaning that we don't have an ability to aggregate local public funds to invest in critical things like infrastructure, roads, other things that would serve like this larger aggregate intermunicipal need. And that puts not only I think Vermont, but just New England as a whole at a comparative disadvantage. Because then we have 250 units of government playing the Hunger Games of grant chasing. And who's got the capacity to get it, who's got the capacity to manage it. Obviously, the RPCs can help, but that's a different role, that planning role and coordination role and municipal project management role that the RPCs play relative to like an actual aggregator of funds. And then like even once you get that, like, and it's like for housing planning at a county level, I'll just say this is, I was going to reduce it to its simplest form. You got a map on a wall that shows where wastewater and water systems run. And transit systems and other things, but especially like this basic stuff. And then you coordinate the planning to figure out, okay, where do we really want to develop? Where is it safe? Where does it make sense? And then you figure out, okay, what else can we do where we've already got this infrastructure in place? But then you figure out, okay, to grow this development here, to develop, to hit our housing targets, or if housing is accelerating too fast, to put the brakes on. Where do you invest in infrastructure and where do you not? And then you develop a capital improvement plan to go along with the land use plan and the transportation planning and all that stuff. And then you develop a capital improvement budget. And the planning department and the finance department actually work together to make sure everything comports with it, so that you're making the investments in the places. And then at the end of it, you've got a county level DPW that can manage the system. So you're not distributing that responsibility across lots of different municipalities. And that's a challenge for us because we don't have that structure. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just saying but it does make it much more difficult for the state to achieve a lot of really what they've identified, is not only just public health and safety goals, but also just basic development goals. So I just wanted to throw that out there as just kind of a nugget of the real difference that I see between like the New England structure and elsewhere in the United States.
Yeah, there are, Chris obviously is hitting on some themes as a planner and a finance person that are near and dear to my heart, like capital planning. There are, of course, some models of what Chris is describing, the solid waste districts and as well as the Champlain Water District are great examples of a regional financing and planning structure. Chris is definitely describing an ideal state of affairs in some ways, but if you look at the actual infrastructure spending in the United States, a lot of it is local, despite the fact that they are working within a county level system, because there's only so far that those counties as separate units of government can go. By far, the bond issuance is the most transparent metric. By far, it's at if you strip away states, local municipalities far outstrip county bond issuance, for example. So a lot of the actual implementation of infrastructure is still going on at the local level. You, of course, don't have as much ability to facilitate the sort of network effects that Chris is describing, where the more users of a system, the better it is, which I think also speaks to like limited voting patterns, like if you don't see the bigger picture and you don't get other people's, like broadband, for example, if you don't have everyone using the system, it's more expensive and less useful. So I'd say those as caveats. As it pertains to the committee, I just want to be mindful of the other stakeholders. Obviously, the planning perspective, again, is near and dear to my heart, but that workforce issue, again, was what everyone kept talking about. So to me, that could be solved in that way, but that could also be solved in other ways. If you're intending to keep the local, close to the ground democratic process. So just to be fair to the folks that aren't in the room, I wanted to articulate that.
Senator Harding.
Okay, I just want to make sure people are clear about what you mean by the workforce issue, because it's not the workforce issue that we hear about all the time, like companies not being able to hire people. It's the towns themselves not having the people to do the work.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not
there's
just
a little bit of that.
Well, it's not just because they can't hire somebody. It's not just because they can't find people to fill the jobs, but because they don't actually even have a job for that position.
Yeah,
It doesn't even exist.
Yeah, it's
like-
very much multifaceted.
It's just like an assistant a town clerk and an assistant road commissioner are the only people that are the, employees of the town.
Right.
So there's not even a position to fill because the towns are too small. So it's a slightly different variation on the larger sort of generic workforce issue that we hear about in Vermont all the time.
I do think there are issues with finding people though, both on a professional level and on a volunteer basis. And there are, for example, fire districts in particular, where I think that a lot of these
Yes.
problems are most acute. They can only hire they can only have volunteers from within those boundaries. And you're talking about extremely small geographic boundaries for those systems. And Danville Fire District, which is probably one of the better ones in the state, has a median age of like 77 and can't find anybody to join. So that's, to me, it's a different definition of workforce, but it's not a training issue. It's in some cases it could be.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it was
Yeah.
clear that it was a different type of workforce issue than the one that we're seeing more broadly. It's a very specific one. It's a one that also relies on volunteers a lot, that, you have 1.5 actual paid employees that make almost nothing, and then 20 volunteers that are doing everything else in the town, and that's not sustainable for lots of our villages. I also wanted to point out, I've been meaning to email this to the committee for a very long time, but Chris wrote a really good op-ed earlier this year in January about understanding the story of town government and its limitations that I'll send to the committee, along with another op-ed that came out fairly recently that's related, and it's more about sharing equipment and professional staff and policy changes and watershed needs sort of in the wake of flooding. So I'll send those to the committee. Just seeing you sitting here, maybe you remember your op-ed.
And one of the specific comments that's probably worth mentioning, and this might be Chris's comment, trying to remember where it came up, was just the limitations of bilateral agreements or like mutual aid agreements in not providing, a large enough scope, essentially.
One of the things I suggest, just got to have this conversation with Charlie Baker, Chittenden County Regional Commission, in that region or county, they have, so in our region, we kind of struggle to have these intermunicipal shared services conversations, because even just the law that allows us to do that, really, I think there was so much fear of county government when that law was created. It kind of really even limits what funds we can use just to have conversations. But in Chittenden County, they've kind of gone through the way Charlie described it. He should speak for it himself, but I just think it'd be interesting to hear from him. They have so many intermunicipal service agreements that it's hard for the towns to kind of track who's volunteering to do what, and how is that connecting to a council or select board to speak authoritatively in that intermunicipal service agreement. because there are just so many. So Charlie might just have the perspective on like the logical, you got a continuum of intermunicipal service agreements. What happens when that becomes like your primary means of intermunicipal cooperation, and you got so many of them, it's kind of hard to track. So I'll let him, he should speak for himself, but I hadn't really thought about that. Because we struggle just to kind of even have the conversations. Because, as I shared with the group too, we have 27 towns in a region, the largest is about 12,000, smallest is a population of 6. And so our 27 towns, we have 26 salt sheds, 26 town garages, 26 road crews. And what I'd love to do is just even have a conversation like, okay, how many, and these salt sheds are costing $1 million a piece now. How many do we really need? Can we strategically locate them where not everybody has to have $1 million salt shed? But we could, and then same thing with, well, Pershing and Culver's and other things. So we've got a great model just to our south, Franklin Regional Council of Governments, which was formed, relatively recently. And there you've got this council of governments that select board chairs sit on, and they make decisions for their towns in collaboration with their select board members about collectively what are they going to invest in, and then those who don't participate, they won't participate. And then the regional planning commission component is actually still part of the COG, but it's over here separate, still has this regional planning commission doing the planning work. That'd be great, like to have Linda Dunleavy, the executive director down there, and just talk to you about that model. That's right, real close, and you literally go visit if you want to. But there are just these basic challenges about because one of the questions I would just have you look at is the existing intermunicipal service agreement structure that was created when the RPCs first asked to consider whether or not council of governments might be enabled. And my direction from my fellow directors is let's keep the council of government piece on the table too. I don't want to take away from what all the other folks said. Plus we had the sheriffs there, we had the public safety, we had schools, all those other really big.
Yeah, I want to be, and I think that's as a kind of a neutral party, and there's just
I just get to Representative Andrews' question,
Yeah.
and I'd love to.
I had one practical thing and then an actual question. So the spreadsheet that you provided is a PDF, and I'm wondering if you could work with the committee assistant to get us the Excel, because none of these really long titles are.
I just saw that, and I
Yeah.
was trying to make it visually on one page, which I know you're in that field to some degree. So I was just modifying that literally as right
It's
now.
all good, I totally appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then my question was, that I think you just stated that nationally, you see a lot more, municipal bonding, than countywide. And I guess what I'm wondering is does that really translate to Vermont? Where, municipalities in other bigger states are a much bigger entity. They're not 500 people living in the Green Mountain National Forest.
I don't know. I'm neutral on it. I just think it's worth considering that even in places that have established systems, although it may sound like an ideal state of affairs, the reality may be different. So I think we have, being fair to the folks that were represented here, there are some aspects of what we have today that are working for them. And there's a reason probably that we have not, that in our long history, we don't have county level governors. So I just think I want to be fair to everybody and acknowledge that there are parts of the current system that people probably like. And certainly sending money away from home is probably a tension, as we've certainly seen on the school side of the equation. So that's my only point. But it's something that we could do some more research on. There are a lot of, Moody's, for example, produces financial medians for communities under 10,000. So that tells you that there is enough activity of small communities seeking bond ratings that, it's not just the New York Cities, it's also others.
Thank you.
All right, so Senator Harrison, sorry, I got Senator, Representative, got to really nail that on.
Person Harrison.
Senator Harrison, go ahead.
Thank you. So a couple of things. I worked for a town that had 4,000 people and we bonded in another state. So it does happen. It was interesting to me to hear about the different districts. So you said the water districts, the Champlain water districts are a good model, or
Well, it's a
This-
model,
this group
it's
thought-
describing what some of what Chris is describing.
okay,
In that we aren't completely void of examples of where you have some regionalization and some collective funding.
right. And so I would find it helpful to get recommendations from the technical group on which of those they think are the most effective. I've seen fire districts really not used for fire services. I mean, they're called that, but it's a way to have water. So I think even just calling something other than it is shows that it could be better. But there's an MPO in Chittenden County. I'd be curious to know from Charlie Baker, I guess, how well that's working. So, that's
I think sorry, if I may, I think what might be helpful is rather than having individual members of the committee ask the technical advisory group what to do, that we as a committee have a
Talk about it. Okay,
conversation.
that's fair.
And then the chairs ask them what to do after having the conversation, so that there's not a like, oh wait, what did Senator Harrison and Representative
Yeah.
Andrews and then, Representative Higley and all the people wanted? It's the committee is asking and the request is coming through the chairs. So
Yeah,
I
no,
think
that's
that's
fine.
great
So
that we want to
that's-
generate a list of things that we want the technical advisory group to do, because we want them to have real work that is useful to our work. So maybe at the end of the committee today, when in our last 45 minutes, we sort of brainstorm a list of this is what we as a committee want the technical advisory group to do. Does that make sense?
I think that will probably result in more successful outcomes.
Yeah.
This is obviously like not the day-to-day, I mean, it is the day-to-day focus of a lot of people in very specific ways, but the sort of bigger picture, people are just involved in their day-to-day. I will say that everyone was very engaged in the conversation.
good. Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
Senator Harrison.
Michael, did you want to talk a little bit about any of the other areas that we didn't focus on as much, like public safety, education, before we move on?
Those did come up. So, again, I think like if you were to sort of rank these, they would probably be a little bit more representative than just sort of treating everything on equal footing. So, public safety really came up in two ways. Specialized staffing, given some of the issues that are being faced by communities where they haven't had, I don't want to speak for them, but I guess regional drug networks, I don't really know, but there's some specific public safety skills that may not exist given the size of the communities. And then the other big thing that came up was, two things that I think are both related was sort of a new funding mechanisms, and this actually was cross-category, that would be more regional-based to handle some of these more network-oriented systems like dispatch, which is, I know you're very focused on. I think that covers the main public safety points. And then there was some crossover on disaster response and infrastructure and housing. I mean, again, all these are so interrelated. It's difficult to pull them apart, but there were planning aspects and sort of like readiness aspects to both infrastructure and housing and disaster response that are more in the sort of planning and coordination sphere rather than having direct staff. So, I think that covers that. And then, of course, schools are an interesting case study in that there's been attempts at regionalization. Well, I mean, there has been regionalization. There's pushback against that we live at the bond bank with mergers and then some instances of former independent school districts either trying to get out or successfully getting out of that that merged school district, and that, you know, there's some learning, I think, associated with that as well. And of course, just from a bandwidth perspective, as a state, we have we have lots of issues around school finance and funding. The thing we're focused on at the bond bank, speaking from our own perspective, is school facilities, where there is billions of dollars worth of need around the state.
Well, I really appreciate this report out and this initial summary of the things that were heard. I really enjoyed listening to the kind of popcorn of things that came up. Earlier in our conversation today, Senator Norris talked about like, okay, well, if we haven't had county government, why are we here? And the reality that I think this initial work from the technical advisory group points out is we have a lot of regional and county systems. We have a lot of different ways that we organize and govern and fund things, but there isn't any consistency across the state. There are some good lessons learned that we can pull out and maybe employ elsewhere. And I wanted to reiterate something that Senator Hardy said in chairing the first meeting, which is that we do not have a preconceived notion going into this long process that we're going to come out with some kind of county government recommendation or a council of governments recommendation. But at this point in the process, we're trying to identify here with you, where are some areas where things are working well, not working well? What are the different things that we have that we're using that are working well and not working well in Vermont? And then looking outside the state to tools, systems, methods of governance, methods of cooperation between municipalities that we might model here in the future in order to solve some of these challenges that you've listed. So that's the work. That's why we're here. It's not to impose or recommend a specific solution, but it's to understand how regional and/or county governments recommendations could improve governance, collaboration, and the lives of Vermonters in the end. So I just wanted to kind of always stay really rooted in, we haven't decided anything yet, and we got a lot of learning to do, and this was super helpful to get a lot out on the table, Michael. So thank you for chairing the technical advisory group and bringing this. Do you have anything else you want to tell us before we?
No, I realized I didn't have a whole lot to say, but I think that was kind of the idea of this effort, was to consolidate, to sort of like start to have themes emerge, so that at least amongst the technical advisory group, they can sort of can dig into those particular themes and how they might be solved amongst the ideas that you generate here. So.
Well, thank you for all your good work. I think we're gonna get hyper visual. I'll use this as the transition here as we welcome Eric Philhorn, Chief of Recovery Intergovernmental Affairs, State Recovery Office. So thanks, Eric, for joining us and showing us some maps. We're
We like maps.
we're in maps.
I don't know. For the record, Eric Philhorn, Chief of Recovery Intergovernmental Relations. Terrible acronym. I also, just as I've been listening to your conversation and thinking about what I'm about to tell you, wanted to mention that I served 9 years on the select board in Richmond, a town that was carved out of Williston and Heinsberg and Pennington, I believe, echoing the county thing down the line. I served as a Chittenden Solid Waste District board member. I was on the MPO in Chittenden County during the merger with the RPC. And I also worked for all the designated agencies statewide. So I'm seeing all of these bits and pieces, and that's informing a little bit how I have been pulling these pieces together on the map. I'm embedded in the Interagency Recovery Group at the FEMA Joint Federal Office, and one of the things that has been made available to me because of that is a dedicated GIS person who is hopefully okay in a secure location in Florida somewhere. Vermont has some of the best GIS people and the best data anywhere. But what this guy has is time and access to some of the federal information. And so the initial map was just consisting of reporting damage and programmatic stuff. And I'm vamping while I figure out how to share my screen. But what happened was he showed me the original map. Start broadcast. You're gonna help me, aren't you? I think if I I split the screen,
trying to
I just
get
need to get my browser open.
Yeah.
Here.
Have you gotten?
I haven't tried.
Have you gotten to?
Yeah, mine doesn't look exactly like Eric's presentation when I click on the link. There isn't a place to
And I grab the
create
thing.
an account. It's asking for.
Is that any better? Now if I do, okay, now I got half, and now we're gonna do all, full screen. We are live, okay. So, thank you. Anyway, as we were looking at the map and things were happening, I kept saying, hey, Marcos, what if you add this layer? Hey, Marcos, what if you add that layer? And at first it was a little haphazard, just finding data. But it's grown and it's continuing to grow because the database is continuing to grow. So what you see here right now is the base map, and it has on it lines which are not permanent lines. It's something we are trying out in part to manage our workload in the recovery office, creating these recovery regions. It's just going to be a little bit of a ride. So you can see the state is roughly divided north, south, central. And I think this map was attached to the back of your report that you received from Douglas Farm.
The Act 118 report.
The Act 118 report has a paper map of this, so you can look at that more closely. This is not partitioning off Pakistan or anything like that. This is us trying things out and going, oh, wait, this town's in this watershed, this town isn't. Maybe we should tweak this. So this is the beginning of a long discussion with regions and partners and folks. One of the things, so I'm just going to walk you through the different pieces of the map, if that's all right.
Yeah, can I just ask,
Yeah.
on your on what you submitted, there are links to get into the map,
Yes.
but there's not a way to get into the map.
I would not try that right now.
Okay.
I would be delighted to offer technical support afterwards or provide Marcos. The problem is that it's a federal FEMA map. And so the licensing, you have to
Got it.
have like a Microsoft account, but you have to have an ArcGIS account. And so there's a little mother may I in it. And
Got it.
they're just, but we will get you there.
All right, I will just watch you do it then.
What I really hope is that when I'm done with this, you'll all say, oh, what if we added this? What if we added that? That there will be more good ideas. I was upstairs with Jill from Ed and realized I don't have supervisory unions in this map, but that's going to matter in the ongoing discussion.
Yes.
So this very first piece of the map is simply choose your favorite disaster because we have so many. So this is all the disasters. And if you click on any county, you can see which disasters are declared in the county and what level of declaration there is, whether it's public assistance, individual assistance, et cetera. You can also go by the disaster. So it was the most recent one until yesterday, 4810. These are the counties impacted by 4810. 4720 was the big one. And you can see all of those spots and you can drill down into the data there. So as we continue to populate this map, we're going to have the different elements of damage and all of the stuff we're mapping for each disaster. You'll be able to break it out by disaster. You'll be able to break it out by region. So that's the initial disaster layer. Stop me anytime. I'm going to try to be linear, but.
So the numbers, the 4810, that's a FEMA number?
Yes.
Defining it? Okay, an event, and then I would say towns might be a good thing to put on.
We'll get there. Absolutely. So,
Senator Norris.
Yeah, I don't see any legend up here. What do the different colors mean on the map?
so the legend is right here. And if you do this, that's just the county names because they're declared by county. Okay. And each one of these has its own legend. So you can back into that and see. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, do you mind if I?
Go ahead, Eric. Yeah.
So one reason we're trying to reevaluate where the lines are, and we're very open, we're going to work with regional groups to try to figure out where the right lines might be, is if you pull the counties back on.
Yeah.
For example, in recent disasters, we've had damage in southern Essex County but not in northern Essex County. And so because FEMA calculates things at a county, like where our current counties are geographically located, sometimes we see people whose homes have been destroyed not become part of the declaration because the pattern of damages doesn't match the historical county boundaries. And so Essex County being the way it's shaped is a really good example of that county does not match the risk profile. I'm not saying these lines are perfect. Having great conversations with Chris about how they might need to be rethought, but that was an example of, I mean, that Essex County does not act as one danger area.
And therefore Essex County misses out on the aid and the assistance that it could get because and that's a county that really, really needs aid and assistance, but because of our county lines doesn't get it.
Yeah, and just to note, while we're talking about the lines, the way that line is drawn between the Kingdom North and South, right now, that is roughly the V-Trans maintenance district. It's a starting place. And I'll also note that a little corner of Caledonia County right now is in the regional conversation for really the Lamoille area. And what we're doing is we're following the Lamoille River watershed all the way down to Milton. And we stopped it at the lake for now, but I think we are mindful of where it actually dumps into the bay. So, you know, there are physical things, there are political things, there are a lot of elements to take into account.
I was just thinking about watersheds. I mean, that makes sense. So is that your intent to put watersheds in? Or do you have a limit of what you can put in?
There's no limit to what we can put in. It's a matter of how much noise you want to create at once, because if you put everything in, you can't see anything.
Right.
And so the idea of this tool is that it's flexible and you can say, I want to see just counties and watersheds. I want to see just towns and fire stations, right? So that's page 1. And I'm just going to take you through, there's this series of icons across the top. Each of them is sort of a class of features. So the recovery region areas, this is a little bit more detailed display of what we've been kind of talking about on the map. So you could just go into a little bit more there, and that'll list the towns that are currently in each region. So you can see the data set that it comes from. And I'm going to jump off of that one before we go too deep. Let's go to, now we have census tract data, because the feds had it for us. And so we added it, and it takes a second to load sometimes, but there you can see, and if you click on any town, you can get basic population data and building values and different ratings, whether it's a risk index, expected annual losses for damage or social vulnerability. So just a really quick digest when you're looking at a town. And we can talk about how many people in it or how many employees they have. It's just another way to inform thinking.
What is the dark versus light blue? You can guess, but.
Dark versus light, very low. Yellow is relatively moderate and blue is relatively low.
Wait, very low what density?
Like income?
I think it's an assessment of vulnerability.
Oh.
I'm not sure which way it goes, one way or another.
Is the dark blue less?
It is.
Yeah.
So
And then,
is dark blue less vulnerable?
Can you zoom in on Berry City?
yeah.
Berry City's classification will tell me which might be. We can work on the labeling
Okay.
to make it a bit more clear what they're actually, what the layers are actually representing.
What's interesting is Berry is divided into two.
Yeah, that's 2 census tracts.
Well, here it says risk index relatively low. Expected annual loss relatively low. Community resilience very high. Risk index.
So the risk is physical damage.
Yeah.
I guess people damage.
Yeah, and the main reason I wanted to look at Berry City is that that's the only zone census tract in the state that FEMA designates as a community disaster resilient zone, where they have high risks and troubling demographics. Like it hits their national metrics as an endangered community. And they use that for the BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. So we'll get some more clarity on what that particular layer is representing. Because I know that Berry does not score well on demographic indicators and it scores high on risk because of all the repeated flooding.
Yeah.
See, as you check boxes, the layers start to accumulate and it, you know, color on color and it gets a little bit less interesting. So you can also overlay the Vermont parcel map when you are, and it's going to take a second because it's big, but when you're looking at these things, you can see down to individual parcels, which can help in conversation. Wait for the robots for a minute. It's a big layer. Towns of interest is a small. Vermont towns of interest were the communities named by FEMA at the very beginning of 4720 as essentially the hotspots that their community assistance program thought was going to need the most help. So you can back out to statewide and see where they are. They more or less, you know, it was a hot take last summer and it more or less lines up with where it's are being focused now. So, still waiting for the parcel map to load. And it could be the map service because it's taking it off of BCGI. So this map is taking data from a bunch of different sources. Some days things go down for maintenance and they might disappear and come back. But here also are the town boundaries, so you can actually see town by town, which helps everybody navigate. And then the counties.
Can you zoom out so we can see the full state?
Sure.
And 4720 was the 2023 flood.
That's July, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So again, they're the towns. You want me to go to Addison County?
No, I was just wondering if we could see the whole state. We're only seeing the, do you look up on our screen and you'll see what we see?
Yeah.
And you're not showing us the state.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it's hard to be graceful with this thing.
Would you mind giving county boundaries?
Yeah. There you go.
So your disaster areas do sort of line up with counties?
They have to.
They have to.
Well, the how we manage recovery, it's better if it does line up with declared disasters, but we're trying to move more towards an organic community watershed population, you know, like Crystal agreed, you know, there are many inputs that impact, you know, I always think about Huntington and Waterbury as Tom Stevens' legislative district. Huntington and Waterbury, they don't hang out. They're on opposite sides of the mountain. You know that, and you know with your legislative districts, they don't always make sense. The population base.
Huntington is in my district.
Right. And I would say Huntington and Richmond are twin towns. One could not live without the other, and we're family, but we're in different districts. So, you know, community versus municipality versus district, they're all variations on a theme.
Senator Harrison had a question.
Just a question. We had in the Economic Development Committee last year, we had a presentation from a group that has a disaster index and they've mapped it. If you're not familiar with that, I'll send it to you because it's pretty interesting. Vermont has more, it's higher on that index than you would expect from
I
just,
think Washington County is something like the second most disaster declarations in America.
So
Yeah.
top 5.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we went on a lot of the per capita stuff, but that's a real significant.
So in the previous question about following county boundaries, you can see in the north, if you throw the county layer back up there, we started deviating from the county boundaries a little bit more in the northern section of the state and the eastern side. And honestly, I have a lot more thinking to do on Orange County, and I think how we address that area is probably different. But that's one thing we want to do with the Regional Recovery Network meetings is to crowdsource whenever we try to redraw some of these lines, it's going to have practical implications and it's going to like introduce inefficiencies where, if we draw a boundary that has 3 different RPCs coming to that meeting, that's 3 times the number of people that end up participating. But in the short term, we want to really have a serious conversation about, if we're just talking about the recovery effort and, advocating for regions that need to recover over the next couple of years from flooding, where is the right grouping? What are the right regions for that specific purpose? So that's what these black lines are intended to group is relative regions for advocating for recovery efforts.
Logical convening.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? A lot of them still. So the federal disaster declarations are done by county. And is there any flexibility in that? So that is, what is the definition of county? It's what the,
Yeah.
but I guess my question is like for other states that have, Louisiana is a parish of county.
Yes.
I mean, my understanding is that the federal government recognizes, and Tim and Doug or any of you might probably know better than me, but they recognize whatever is the official, that has the authority of a regional government. So a county and a parish and are the same.
Tribal entities also.
And tribal entities, that they have to have some kind of official authority as a government entity. And there's a definition of that. So our regional planning commissions don't meet that at all. They don't have the authority. They're not an elected body. They're not a recognized government. They are just a regional entity that we've kind of created sort of in statute, but they're not the official government for that region. So that's why they're done by counties. But this map, is it 3? Is it divided into 3? So it's the dark black lines that are the dividing ones for your recovery?
Yeah, the darker lines are north, central, and south, and that was initially done really to divide labor between the regional recovery officers that we have. So Pat Moulton has the middle, and at the moment, Holly Hayden and Todd Eaton, who are also part-time at VTrans, are handling the north and south. And it's, kind of administrative support coordination, rallying role.
And how does that play out based on the level of damage in each place and also the population in each place?
So we looked more at the damage patterns. And the damage patterns, if you look at what we did around Lamoille County, that was the main reason for modifying that section and not having it fit with, where Lamoille County is sited. Because the damage patterns along the river continued and there was a string there. NK North also, you can see a pretty consistent clustering of damage there. We didn't look at relative population. We kind of eyeballed how much work people are going to be able to do. However, with the NEK, we have found, actually trying to work with the LTRGs over the last year, that the geographic distance, and this is also a problem we try to account for in school funding, the geographic distance in these areas creates a lot more time invested necessary to work with with a much smaller population. So covering up by relative amount of damage impacted homes, and then and then overcounting some of the amounts of damage in areas that are geographically just challenging to get to. So it wasn't a perfect formula by any means. Yeah, one reason Pat has a smaller geographic region than everyone else is you can see the hotspot from last year's event in central Vermont.
Yeah, so this is a heat map of the damage that FEMA generated, which definitely was a driver in that. And transitioning now to a different set of data sets. This is the public assistance damage inventory, which means town by town. These are all, each one of these squares is a claim. And if you click on it, you can see what it's about. So I'm just going to randomly touch something. Williamstown, category C, roads and bridges. Here's 200-foot long by 2 foot wide by 2 foot deep road washout in the latitude and longitude, Brockway Hill Road, Town Highway 12. So all of the damage from 4720 is here on the map. And when we get to the point where all of that data is compiled for the other disasters, you'll be able to say, what about 4810, which is beginning of last month, or 4826, which was declared yesterday. And you might even get good at the numbers eventually. I'll do a t-shirt with all of them. So that's all the public assistance, and you can see that by town. And then individual assistance applications, the way they had to do this was number by town. And it's kind of like COVID data. If you put more than 4 or 6 cases, or if you put less than 6 cases in a town, people could figure out who was who. So they can only give raw numbers for the town, but you can go and look by town at that information. And I already showed you the heat map.
And the individual assistance is, it sort of points to the problem with the county problem, because the counties that didn't get individual assistance, there could have been somebody who lost a home but didn't get help.
There were
Right.
about 0 people that needed help right there.
Right.
So we need to overlay the 2-on-1 information as well
Yeah.
to try to see where those edges happened, where people were just over a county boundary, so they weren't eligible.
Right.
And Addison County, of course, had that problem.
Ripton.
And Ripon,
significant.
yeah. And going forward, we're going to have better data on our side because updates we've made to how we gather 211 data. Again, in creating this, because FEMA was putting it together, if there was a data set that was coming from the federal government, they have very strict rules about what can and can't be shared. And we would launch a version of this map, and then they would take it down a day later, and they'd be like, no, if you put these 2 up at the same time, people will be able to figure something out. So it's a little bit of a push-pull, but again, it's a free resource. So and Marcos is great to work with. That's everything he can to help us. Another
Watershed.
Watershed?
Yeah.
Okay, so watershed planning, this is where we get into some of the different regional elements. So we've got watershed planning basin areas. We have regional economic development corporations. We have regional planning commissions, and you can zoom in closer and put the town layer on and then look at, the differences by town of counties, REDCs, RPCs, health department, local office territories, all of the different political entities that operate. You can start to compare the layers, and we can make these a little more transparent so that you can see multiples, but eventually, you start to just play color wheel because you've got one color over another color and levels of transparency. But if you're comparing like 1 or 2 back and forth, it's really easy to see where some of the outlier towns are. Or another thing is
If you drop the RPC there.
RPC's off, and I have health districts. Should I drop health and
Well,
hospitals?
keep health and what else is on right now?
Hospital districts. Cleans up a little.
Yeah. think, health districts are always an interesting one to me because those are generally organized around like, how do we take care of the people in our area? So they do have a very practical purpose. So it's one of the layers we've looked at when we're trying to think about this, but.
And then,
Districts right here.
yeah,
That's
this is health
interesting.
districts. And then, this is designated agencies. So that's Capstone and CBOEO, Broad.
So regional community
Separate.
action partnership. there.
Right, AKA designated agencies. And then these are the long-term recovery groups, which don't exactly match anything mostly, and they're completely organic and new.
And as Eric said, we're happy to take requests from the committee through the chairs to, can you add this particular layer? Can you put more detail and more explanation on this particular layer because it's not clear what it represents, things like that. We're happy to try to improve the tool so that it can be more useful to the committee.
This is all the river main stems. So you can talk watersheds or just look at the rivers and see how they come and go within.
Do you have the public safety, regional public safety things in here, like the EMS and dispatch, and obviously the sheriffs are by county, but
Try to get those in,
I don't know if we have that yet. That's a good idea. We added fire stations recently because
very basic one, I think. Because last year, what's this?
fire stations.
Fire stations.
We have a lot of them.
Yeah, we do. Senator Watson put together a map on dispatch last year, which was her estimation of what the data she could find of where the dispatch districts were.
Mhm.
And it was pretty telling, and where it was so difficult to tell who had authority to dispatch who. She was like, I just had to make it white because it was so complicated, you couldn't really tell who was dispatching who. So it might be helpful to get more public safety data in here on.
It generally takes about a day for Marcos to turn around a layer, figure out how to get it in and park it. So if you want to maybe forward requests through,
We'll talk about it at the end of the meeting about.
tell me what would help.
Yeah, because I'm not even sure that data, there's another study committee working on that, and whether they have the data yet on dispatch districts.
That's one of my favorite games is finding the data.
Yeah.
So whatever you want. I mean, this is the power grid here. These are the main transmission lines.
Ooh, cool.
That's important.
Here's all the 3, 2, 1. All culverts. Uh-oh.
All the culverts?
Culvert, yeah.
Nice.
I think it was Kevin Biani who led that. It's gonna take forever. See, it's starting to come up. There are a lot.
So is that
I think you need a
feeding
bigger
from
scale.
the AOT,
Be transparent.
transparency? Yeah, because I have to say, like, when I was first on the transportation committee back in 13-14, this was like the dream, was to be able to say, where is all of the infrastructure?
Mhm.
And it's amazing to sit here 10 years later and be like, yeah, we can pull up a GIS map with a bunch of other info that shows you where every single culvert is.
It matters.
It really does.
I'm not a GIS person, but I love to play with them. When I was at VTrans, I knew we had telemetry from the plow trucks and we had mapping, and people kept saying, there hasn't been a plow truck here all day. And I'm like, I know there has been. I can see it internally. And so that's how we created the Find My Plow thing. And this is just another iteration of Find My Plow, except now it's culverts and flood damage and
Wait, so this is culverts that's loaded?
that was culverts.
That was
It's gonna take forever to load, but yeah, you can see culverts, bridges, and anything that we keep track of, chances are there's a database and we can look at, I don't know the difference between a recreational well and an agricultural well. Well, I mean, I know what agriculture is. I don't know what the rec piece of it is, but you know,
These are water wells.
Fun wells
These are
versus.
wells.
just need some water for enjoyment.
So it's out there. How much of it is useful, I think, depends on what your question is. a political piece against, and then when I say political, I mean like a political map, not vote could be politics.
Voting places where people vote,
I think it just
hand count.
gave up. It couldn't handle the wells. Sorry, it's an iPad. So the guide that you have will show you how to create an account and get into this. And if you have trouble, you can just reach out to me directly and I'll connect you with Marcos and he'll walk it through. It's a little counterintuitive. Basically, whatever the biggest, brightest button is, don't push that button. There's probably a smaller button down below that says I can create an account in the federal government, and here we go into the map.
Okay.
Yeah, Representative Jacobs.
I have a question in regards to, I think Doug, you talked about the issue in the Essex County where the southern part was hit hard and the northern part wasn't. And it made it sound like the folks in the northern part weren't going to receive any funding. And I guess my question is, and it sounds like the crux of some of what we're talking about here about this county form of government. I'm just thinking of even an example in 1997 where Lowell and Montgomery, two separate counties, were hit bad with flooding. And is there a requirement of FEMA to have only county amounts of damage considered? Or I guess maybe I'm thinking of maybe we ought to try to change the federal government's form of calculation. Because again, that sort of thing does happen. It's pretty specific to towns, single towns that may be in separate counties.
Yeah, the Fed's calculation is anchored in the Stafford Act to the county level of government. The PA calculation is very firm, very numbers based, leaves little subjectivity. Like once we cross a certain amount, we're good. We're going to get public assistance. Individual assistance is a lot squishier. There's a calculation, but it's got a big range on what FEMA may or may not approve, and you get to argue based on the last 2 years of events if there's been a cumulative impact. So this year, Essex County was hit hard enough that Essex is in both disasters this year, 4810 and now 4826. Last year is where we had small pockets of damage that crossed over the border of Essex, but Essex itself didn't have enough damage to be in there. From a practical perspective, I don't think we're going to get Congress to shift off of a county-based approach to calculation, because going down to the town level would be insane for FEMA to manage. It'd be very, very challenging. And I think they argue against it successfully. Senator Welch is at the moment advocating for a much more decentralized approach to disaster response and recovery with FEMA. It sounds pretentious, but I'm in agreement with some of his goals, but I don't think it could be completely decentralized. I don't know that the model he's pushing for could be made to function. So, probably shouldn't have said that out loud, but I think there's a lot of challenges in decentralizing it to that level. So the problem is no lines we ever draw on a map will be perfect for every particular storm that might hit Vermont. Our topography is too complicated. Storms are going to sit in certain areas and we might have this, but we can try to draw better maps that more often capture the damage pattern. And it generally will be accomplished through redrawing the historical political subdivisions of county government. But I think FEMA will acknowledge if you've taken certain steps, you can get a different regional map recognized by FEMA. So we could do that without even changing the official old counties if we didn't want to disrupt that. Much more complicated and it would end up being confusing, but it's possible.
Thanks for that.
Yes, Senator Parker.
I think it's important, when we're looking at this whole question of do we want to make any changes to county or regional government, that we look, the disaster recovery and relationship with FEMA is one piece of it. And it's a super important piece, especially right now, and it's gonna obviously continue to be a leading reason to have this conversation. But we also need to take into consideration other functions of local and regional government and how we can create a structure that works for all the other things we're talking about too, public safety, just sort of everyday public safety, not just disaster public safety. And also things like, you know, regular planning and housing and infrastructure just in general, and road maintenance and health and safety, and even things like I mentioned, voting and everything. So there are a lot of other considerations as well, but this one is sort of front and center right now because we've just been through it so many times. And then on top of it, having the COVID experience too, which it came into play there because all the federal money was supposed to go to counties. And we had to ask special permission to get it to go to towns.
So I've just been thinking about the lines that you've drawn for disaster recovery, and obviously it's based on the reality that we have today. And one of the things I think about is, you know, in the future, we could have different types of disasters that aren't flooding related. So something that comes to mind kind of organically for me is like forest fires, right? So I guess my question is, how flexible or useful would this construct to be in the face of other kinds of disasters?
You know.
And I know this is an imperfect world we live in, so.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna briefly lead with, we're building a website for the recovery office, and we resisted the temptation to call it flood recovery. We're calling it disaster recovery because we know wildfires are probably in our future. So we're mindful of it, but.
Right. And yes, it's important that we don't get blinders on and only focus on, especially inundation risk, right? Which is why these, if you pull up the watershed layer, these don't perfectly match the watersheds, or we would have just traced around each of the watersheds. Some areas of our state, the fluvial erosion and the runoff are much higher of a risk, and that's what we saw in the Northeast Kingdom this time around. And we're convening the regional groups to talk about these lines and see where they may need to shift. And we do want to have that broader, not just disaster response, but economic centers, regional resources. Well, for whatever reason, how could we convene these regions a little bit differently in the short term for the next couple of years? And maybe how we do that helps with your discussions as a committee. Maybe it's too specialized of a use and it doesn't end up being that informative, but I think you're right that it's not just about flooding. It's more about how we're organized as people, where all of the infrastructure and where all of the groups are, and trying to think of the right way to align those.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, wind is another perennial, which is why it's nice to have the grid on the map there, so. There it is.
Oh, colors didn't match very well.
Yeah. This is now watersheds, river main stems on top of counties and recovery regions with the grid. So there's a point at which there becomes so much noise that you have to start to take things out.
For the committee, like for my own purposes, I'm now looking at all these layers and thinking, well, what about these two towns,
Yeah.
And
half of that next one.
these two towns, like moving some of those lines a little bit.
I'm a nerd too.
Well, thank you for sharing this really powerful tool with us. In our committee's discussions, I appreciate the invitation to ask for layers and provide data and add things to the mapping tool, because I think it will be helpful for us as we try to see if there are changes or combinations that we might want to consider doing a little differently in the future.
Yeah, no, please help us improve it. We have the federal resource for at least another 3 or 4 months, and we can probably renew it, so
Thank you very much, Ed.
I need to meet with FEMA and then I'll be back.
Okay. Thanks for spending so much time with us, Doug. I think it's really beautiful to have you here. So our last agenda item before we go to lunch, I want to welcome Patricia Toth to join us to talk a little bit about, I'm always forgetting this, the UVM Office of Engagement and the Local Institute for Regional Partnership. So to tee this up, I think there may be the possibility of some collaboration and support from your group. And so we'd love to hear what you have to tell the committee with us today.
Great, thank you for having me here, and I'll be brief. I am Tricia Coates, and I'm from the University of Vermont. I'm the director of UVM's Office of Engagement and the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships, which is part of the Office of Engagement. And before I talk about our work together on a research study, I just wanted to share a little bit of context about the why and the how of the university's work in this space. If you could go to slide 2, please. One wasn't really. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So the University of Vermont is, oh, one back, please. Thank you. The University of Vermont, as you know, is the state's land grant institution, and I just thought it was worth stating that what that means is that the university has an obligation and a priority to provide knowledge, research, data, technical expertise for the benefit of Vermont and Vermonters. The Office of Engagement, as Senator Hardy said, it's, or as Representative McCarthy said, it's a new presence for UVM in regions and communities across the state. It's also providing a front door at the university to facilitate connections with our faculty, with our technical experts, with our services, with our educators. I will say that for this office, this team, the most critical need that they have observed almost on a daily basis is that our municipalities are struggling due to lack of capacity to respond to challenges, much less to plan for the future that they want for their communities. In response, some of the things that our office is building is a few new services. One is data services that we are providing for municipalities and state agencies, regional planning commissions to support reporting and grant writing. Another thing is we are supporting service learning projects for faculty engaged with municipalities around flood recovery. We are standing up a new local government institute that is providing professional development and a cohort model for municipal administrators. And we know that across the university, faculty are in the field supporting state agencies with river corridor management, water quality work, et cetera. The Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships is this very unique and potentially short-term opportunity to fund partnerships between our faculty, researchers, and community organizations in support of this land grant mission. So if I wanted to just take a quick minute to tell you about this Leahy Institute because it is new. So if you could go to the next slide. So there are really 3 things that we do. The first and thing that most people know about is our ability to make grants. We have an open grant round currently. And those, again, they support partnerships between the university and community organizations. We are partnering with regional planning commissions. We are partnering with businesses. We are partnering with folks working in refugee resettlement in Windham County, et cetera. Next, the other thing we do at, this is something that I feel very strongly about. If the Leahy Institute funding is potentially short-term, what are we building that will will outlast us, that will serve this land grant mission. So we're building a stronger data services program for Vermonters. We're providing more opportunities for students to engage with government at all levels. This has been interesting. We have student internship cohorts in different parts of the state. We had a cohort of 12 students who lived and worked in the Northeast Kingdom this summer. Last summer, they were in Central Vermont. And we have a delightful podcast that I welcome you all to listen to. And finally, we also have the ability to convene, and whether that is a small group of municipalities that we convened yesterday for Chittenden County municipalities, or if it's the large RISE conference that we hosted in June, this is something we're bringing to this land grant mission work. And then you can go to the next, please. I want to talk specifically about how academic policy research might fit into this work that we do. Academic policy research is unique in that it is, again, impartial, often peer-reviewed research, and it's brought to a table like this to support your exploration of regional governance. So in this case, we would bring data. I love seeing this map. There may be some interesting maps that other states have used in exploring these questions. We can also connect you with our consortia of national experts, whether they are planners or public administrators or other rural states grappling with some of these same questions. We can also, in the end, we'll craft reports that include case studies, best practices, and cutting edge research. And if, Mike, you just went one more, then you're good to go. Thank you. And we have a very rough outline.
Hold on 1 second. Just gonna try to get the noise outside the committee room to calm down. There's I think a big tour group with a lot of kids that are being very boisterous. I love that in the State House. Just want to make sure everyone can hear what you have to say.
Thanks.
We're gonna try to get things settled down a little bit out in the hallway. Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that.
You have the power.
People are really excited to be at the State House. We love that.
Yeah, it's busy today.
45 kids.
So we are proposing a study that would be an independent review of approaches and efforts undertaken by state and tribal entities for better regional alignment and deployment of resources. And the components would include data analysis, Vermont and elsewhere, a review of best practices and case studies, and then a presentation of different approaches to regional governance. And what I'd like to propose is that the research team meets with the chairs and or the committee or whoever you wanted to bring to the table, and we really scope out what the content of the study would be that would be most helpful. This is a general outline of what we would bring, and the last slide, please, is really, I just wanted to introduce you to the team. I'm very excited about who we're bringing to the table here. Christina Barsky is a new director of our Masters in Public Administration program at UVM. She has expertise in rural governance, and she is very excited about this project. She came to Vermont and I slid this right across her desk. And so she'll be working with us to craft the right outline for the committee. And she is going to be bringing on one of her colleagues that she's done research with, Lauren McTeague from the University of Montana. And she'll bring perspectives that have come from her work in emergency management and also rural governance. One other thing I wanted to share with you about Dr. Barsky is she'll be teaching a capstone course for her graduate students in the spring, and she's proposing to engage her graduate students in the study with her. So that just brings a lot more capacity for us to give you a nice study. So that's what we're here to offer and why, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. You had mentioned, I believe, maybe a dozen UVM students that
Yes.
spent time in the Northeast Kingdom. What was involved with that?
Yeah.
I mean, what were they looking at? What was the end results of, was there a study? What were they looking at?
It was in partnership with the Center for an Ag Economy and about 7 other employers in the area. Everybody from the Center for an Ag Economy to the Hardwick Gazette to Fairbanks Museum. And we had one of our faculty members who you may know, Dr. Travis Reynolds from Craftsbury, brought these students to the Kingdom. We had a partnership. They stayed right at Sterling College. They worked for these employers, and it was really a wonderful experience. They learned about rural communities, about the challenges faced by these small employers in terms, in workforce, and they really fell in love with, I will tell you that they fell in love with church suppers and swimming holes, and they had a really wonderful experience. The purpose of that program is for UVM students to experience internships and student engagement opportunities outside of Chittenden County. So that was a very positive experience. There were a few job offers that came out of that for some of those students.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll be continuing that as long as we can support it with the right faculty partner and the right funding.
Great.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I just wanted to give the committee a little background of, and we talked about this last time, and in the interim, Representative McCarthy and I reached out to Tricia to try to start to put some meat on the bones of getting a research partner to help us with this work. In part because UVM has the expertise and the sort of mission to help us work in this area, but also because we don't have the staff capacity to do this work internally. One of the ways that we got this committee sort of through was with the promise that we wouldn't overburden Ledge Council and JFO with trying to do a lot of this internally. So we have $50,000 that we can put toward it, and then I think UVM has some resources they could potentially bring to the table so that we can have this outside research. And it also takes pressure off of us from doing that kind of research and just us having the more high level policy conversations. So we are working with Tricia and then also with JFO to try to work this out, but wanted to see what the committee's response was. And also Michael Gahn, who's not in the room anymore, but he was reaching out to some national partners that might be able to bring in some sort of national perspectives as well into the work, and maybe in tandem with what UVM is offering. So that's the kind of background to this. So if anyone has ideas or questions or concerns, please let us know, because we're kind of moving forward a little bit with this if we can.
Yeah, I'll just build on that and say that it seemed like an obvious fit, the idea that you've got a new director of the public administration master's program that's eager to help us out. It seems like there's some synergy there, and I think that most of us can trust that UVM is going to help make recommendations that are really a part of the story that we're all living in our Vermont communities. And if we have some kind of national expert from outside come and help us with research, that could end up giving us recommendations that maybe don't fit with that.
And I think that'll that will require just ongoing dialogue. And, you know, if we need to pivot, we can pivot. So, because we all can just stay in touch as we go forward. So I would recommend that we, you know, scope this out over the next few weeks and get going.
So if the committee is okay with this as a direction, we can keep moving forward.
Yeah, just more detail would be helpful. You know,
Yeah,
what the products would include and what, topics.
Sure.
That's important. And I think if, accountability could be in that, to me, it's not just using resources effectively, but improving accountability.
Indeed, yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that I mentioned to Tricia is that we need to look at what the Act 118 says and map out the agreement with UVM so that it's following sort of what our charge is. And that includes accountability and transparency and things like those kinds of things.
Good.
And we would have a contract written through JFO.
Oh, of
So there
course.
would be something, so maybe next meeting, we can
Bring it fleshed
sort of
out.
bring it more fleshed out for everybody to review, because we're just so early in the stages right now.
Great. And thank you. It's exciting.
It is exciting. Thank you for considering this.
Any other questions for Tricia? Anything else you want to tell us before we?
No, I'm looking forward to working with you and bringing Christina.
Well, just one other question, is that just the ominous, you may not exist anymore, I'm not aware,
Oh,
maybe I should be
it's-
aware of that.
Well, it's just, you know, with federal funding, right?
Oh,
Like,
okay,
So
okay.
the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships has a federal grant that has a 5-year period of performance. So
Okay.
where our whole delegation is advocating for continued funding.
Okay.
So,
Great.
but I just like to operate on that. Let's give ourselves a deadline and get things stood up in a way that they'll last
Definitely.
and be sustainable.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
We're excited to take the next step. So before we break for lunch, this afternoon, we're going to hear from a couple of, we're going to hear from the national group that is the Association of County Governments. And we're going to hear from an example of from the Oregon Metro, which is, I think, going to be an interesting, creative example of how you do regional governance. And then we'll have Doug back and talk about the MTAP, the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. So that'll be our afternoon. This was a lot today. I love this stuff. It's like going back to college. I don't know how you are. A lot of learning before we start doing any recommending.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to tee up
No, I
with
think
your lunch?
This is good. We got a lot this morning, and just make sure people are back a little before 1 so we can get started right on time and then not have